And so St. Paul, the great apostle to the Gentiles, he taught so many things. You know, some of the key things that he taught. Moral theology, we said that, you know, in the first of St. Paul's letters, listed chronologically, I mean, the first in the Bible. Romans has 16 chapters. And it's pretty strong, as many of his letters are. He talked to the Romans and spoke about several things. Now, St. Paul was a straight shooter, as were all of the saints. That something, I think, over the years has happened. I don't know if perhaps we think that somehow by toning things down we have a better chance of succeeding. There's a certain truth in that, but only to a point. You don't want to tone it down to where it becomes unrecognizable. St. Paul didn't do that. In Romans, right off in chapter 1, he talked about the not being ashamed of the gospel. Are we ashamed of the gospel? I sometimes wonder today, because we are pretty quiet in the face of gross moral evil, quite frequently. Now, you know, everyone in the church pretty much knows, well, I shouldn't say that. We used to know what the church held in various moral areas. The church still holds the same exact things that she ever held in basic moral teaching. But a lot of people have become confused because of maybe ambiguous teaching. The teaching itself isn't ambiguous. It's straightforward, black and white truth. But St. Paul talked to the Romans. He said, you know, don't be ashamed of the gospel. Now, why would he say that? Well, because a lot of people were ashamed of the gospel. They were afraid in a pagan atmosphere to give witness to the truth of the gospel. My grandmother used to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. All right? Look at today. How many Catholics are ashamed of the gospel? You know, they're afraid. You don't have to preach sermons on street corners. You don't have to be loud about it. You don't have to be obnoxious about it. Quiet strength, knowing that you're right. You know, in a neo-pagan society, don't be ashamed of the gospel. We're right, they're wrong. Very simple. He talked to the Roman, you said your senseless minds are darkened. You know, you don't know your left hand or your right. You're given up to lust. He could be talking to this generation in particular. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, he said to them. How often that's happened here. He spoke about homosexuality. There are those today who would distort and pervert the Word of God, trying to say that it's just fine. It's okay, you know, if that's what you want to do, fine. It's just an alternative lifestyle. Once again, using verbal engineering to confuse people. The Word of God doesn't say it's fine. St. Paul's very, very clear that it is an evil thing. We're not saying people that have a certain orientation are evil, but acting out on that orientation is serious sin, mortal sin. St. Paul's clear on that. He says that since they didn't see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a base mind and improper conduct. And they were filled with all kind of wickedness. This is how St. Paul talked. Can you imagine today if St. Paul, or in fact Jesus, went to many of our churches today? I know this because I've preached in far more churches than the average priest. I've traveled 2 million miles preaching the gospel. I've preached in 49 states, multiple dioceses in some of those states, several foreign countries. And I've had, by and large, a much better than average response, but I've also gone to the places who invited me and they knew what they were getting. If I were to go to your average parish, many places, the response would not be as good. A lot of places, they'd run you out of town on a rail. I used to, in the beginning, before my reputation preceded me, I used to tell whoever was traveling with me, I said, keep the vehicle running. We might have to make a quick getaway. Because, you know, sometimes when you talk like St. Paul, they don't like it very much. St. Paul said to the Romans, you're filled with wickedness. You're evil. Filled with covetousness, malice. You're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malignity. You're gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, and boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to your parents. You're foolish, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. Those were just a few of the things St. Paul said. That's how he talked, straightforward. And I'll tell you something, nobody was ever confused about what he meant. He was a straight shooter. You know, Jesus said, say yes when you mean no, yes, and no when you mean no. Yes when you mean yes, and no when you mean no, all else is from the evil one. In other words, what he was saying was just speak the truth clearly and unambiguously.